All right, guys, we are on to the second semester of geometry, and today we're kind of going to do a little review of what we did back at the beginning of this unit. So the next two sections have to do with triangle congruence because they have a couple of like special scenarios for triangles. But before we do that, we kind of need to make sure that we know the difference between sides and angles and which sides and which angles are congruent and which ones are not. So just a little visual for you, because I think some people struggle with sides and angles. So I've got 3 pens here. And if I make a triangle, try to get this in here. Okay, if I make a triangle, the pens themselves would be considered the sides. So just keep that in mind today. So this is a side, this is a side, and this is a side. When you name a side, you use 2 letters. Like I would name it by its end points. So start, finish, these 2, whatever, if they had a letter on it, which they will today. These 2 letters, these 2 letters. So the sides of your triangle are, like in this case, the pens. Now, the angles are where the pens come together. So like right here, where the pens come together, the blue and the pink, this is an angle. Angles are always on the inside. When you name an angle, you can either use 1 letter if there's only 1 angle coming from it, or sometimes, let me grab another pen here. We'll grab a yellow. Like here, now I have multiple, oh, you can't see that. Like here, now I have kind of multiple angles using this pink, I guess, side here. So I have this angle and this angle that use the pink one. I would have to use 3 letters. So if you only have 2 sides that come together, then, and only 2 sides that are touching, you can use 1 letter, or you're going to have to use 3. And I'm going to kind of refresh your memory on that here in a second, but just keep that in mind today when you are naming things. And that's really all you're doing today, is you're going to be taking a look at some pictures and naming the congruent pieces. I know that sounds easy. Maybe it will be. I don't know. I hope it is. But the hard thing is that sometimes on your pictures, the congruent pieces won't be marked. So there's this thing called an included angle, and then on Thursday we're going to talk about included sides. But included angle is an angle that it's not, oh wait, no, not included angle. I meant to talk about vertical angles. I'm sorry. So 2 things that won't be marked are vertical angles and shared sides. These are the things that you are going to have to really look for. They will not have markings on the pictures. You're going to have to add those markings in to kind of help you out. So vertical angles, just as a reminder, those are your angles that are back to back. So like this angle and this angle would be vertical angles. Now, just like they were, I think back in our parallel line unit, they don't mark them as congruent. They're going to assume that you remember that they're congruent. So vertical angles are congruent. The other thing that they're not going to mark on pictures are things called shared sides. So, and that's the reflexive property. That's what I needed to chat about down here. I don't use the word reflexive property because it's confusing to me. But if I say shared side, that's a red flag to me that I have 2 triangles that are connected to each other. And notice, like, here's a triangle, here's a triangle. What do those 2 triangles have in common? This side right here. They're not going to mark it, and you're going to see here in a second that you're going to have tons of markings all over these pictures, but they are not going to mark the shared side. Again, it's one of those things they're going to assume that you know that that side on this triangle and that side on this triangle are congruent to each other. So the name of the game today is just listing sides and angles that are congruent. So if you flip the page in your notes, we're going to take a look at this page, this whole entire page. We're just going to go through and list out sides and angles that end up being congruent to each other. And I'm going to label them sides or angles with S's and A's and all that good stuff. So if we take a look at A here, so for A, see how this has 1 marking and this has 1 marking? That means those 2 sides are congruent. So I have a side, and then I'm going to write their names of those two sides. So I have this side right here. So ST is congruent to this side YZ. Okay, so there's one. And then I also have two markings here on this side. So that means that side and that side are congruent. Okay, so I'm going to say SR is congruent. So SR, I'm going to say YX. I'm trying to stay consistent with how I name them. And then the last thing is I noticed that this has an arc and this has an arc. This is where two sides come together. These are angles. I can use one letter on that. So for the angles, I can say angle S is congruent to angle Y. And that's all you know. At most, you'll probably know 3. Some of these you'll only know 2, but at most you'll know 3. Move on to the next one for part B. So here we have sides. Let's see, one marking, one marking. So let's go AB, keep it alphabetical, is congruent. So if I go from A to B, I'm going to go from D to E. AB is congruent to DE. And then these have two markings. So that's another side, because that would be like one of our pens. So BC is congruent to, and if I go from B to C, I go from E to F. And then 3 markings, that's on like this pen, like this side. And then 3 markings, that's on that side. So that's another side. That would be, let's go AC is congruent to, and if I go from A to C, I would have to go from D to F. So that one just has all 3 sides. Notice there's no markings on the angles. There's no vertical angles. They're not connected together. So call it a day, move on. Now for these 2 triangles, and this is all you're doing today, just labeling and naming the different parts that are congruent. It's going to set you up for major success tomorrow, I hope. So for C, we have this side and this side, so that is a side. And I'm going to name this one VW, and that is congruent to this side, which is YZ. My Z's look like 2's, that's why I put that little dash in there. And then I'm going to switch it up, and I'm going to do the angle next. So this angle and this angle, they have the 2 arcs in there. They're the only angles at this point, or there's only 2 sides that come together there. So I only have to use one letter. So these angles, and I'm trying to color code it so you see the difference. This is angle W. Notice I'm putting the angle sign. I'm not just putting a W, so that way we all know that this is an angle that you're talking about. Angle W is congruent to angle Z. And then this side has 2 dashes, that has 2 dashes, so that's another side. So you would say UW is congruent to, let's see, from U to W, I've got to go XZ. All right, let's look at letter D here. So now we have a pair of triangles that are connected. So let's label or name what we know for sure that are marked. So we have this side with 1 dash, this side with 1 dash, so that's a side. And we'll go YZ is congruent, and then we'll do YX. And then we have this side, 2 dashes, 2 dashes, that's another side. WZ is congruent, WZ, then you go WX. Now, see how these 2 triangles are connected to each other. If I were to separate them, they both would have a side labeled WY. So what that means is this is considered to be your shared side. You have to put that here. So we have a side, and this is going to seem silly to you to have to put it, but I promise you that in the future, this will be a lifesaver. So this is your 3rd side, so we know that WY is congruent to WY. So whenever you have a side that your triangles share or have in common, you have to put it here. Hopefully that makes sense. You're going to see some of them today. And then the last one is these are these 2 triangles. So here I have 1 dash, 1 dash. Those are sides. So side, let's see, BO. I'm sure everyone's giggling, is congruent. If I go from B to O, I go from C to O. And then I have this side right here with 2 dashes. That's another side. AO is congruent to, here's your 2 dashes, DO. Now, this is the other thing I told you to be careful on, is when you have the crisscrossing, or it kind of looks like a bow tie, you do have the vertical angles. They will never, ever, 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 ever label them or put the markings on them. So you're going to have to train your eye to see them. This is a visual person's thing. You've got to look for them. So now these angles, you can't say angle O is congruent to angle O. And hopefully that kind of makes sense. Like you can't just say O is congruent to O, because this angle and this angle, they're in 2 different triangles. So you're going to have to use 3 letters. When you use 3 letters, the main thing that you have to keep in mind is that the angle you're actually talking about has to go in the middle. So I'm going to say angle BOA is congruent to angle BOA is going to be congruent to COD. Order does matter, so please be a little careful with that. Hopefully that made sense, like how I named them. Main thing to keep in mind is that angle you're talking about has to be in the middle. And it only works, and you're only really going to probably have to use 3 letters when you have vertical angles. So on your worksheet today, on the worksheet, you are going to be doing the same exact thing. Let me lift this up a little bit. You're going to be taking a look at all of these different pictures, and it's going to seem like it's obnoxious and there's a lot, and there kind of is a lot. These angles right here, like this one and this one, you can't say angle M because there's 2 angle M's here, so you will have to use 3 letters on those angles. Anytime you have triangles that are connected together like that at the angle, you have to use 3 letters. Like this, you can say A and D because there's no other angles there. Here, you can't say I and I because there's multiple angles there. So you've got to start getting to the point where you understand when to use 1 letter or when to use 3 letters. When in doubt, use 3, because using 3 letters is never, ever, ever going to be wrong. So on this worksheet, it's up to you. You can do it on the worksheet, or if you want to grab a separate sheet of paper out, you're more than welcome to do that. You are going to list, there's going to be, I believe, 3 per problem, 3 things that are congruent in each picture. So you should be able to come up with 3, just like we did here. Now, you're not going to do this little chunk down here. You're only going to do 1 through 18. So on the worksheet, you're only going to do the first 1 through 18. That is it. You're going to list out what those triangles have congruent. And then we're going to kind of be adding to that worksheet later on this week. Kind of go back and figure some stuff out together. So grab that worksheet or head on over to GoFormative, depending on what class you have. Get that done. Actually, it's not on GoFormative. You'd have to actually do this on paper anyway. So get this done, and we will be checking over it tomorrow. See you tomorrow.